All right. Well, good morning, everyone. It's time. So welcome. It's good to have you back this month. This month, we're going to be talking about creating authentic and accurate project schedules. And so as we get ready to do this, let me just lay a little foundation for this. All of us, if due to outside things happening to our project, all of us can have our schedules messed up. If we didn't do a good job interviewing the customer, or somebody didn't do a good job interviewing the customer, or somebody was way too optimistic in what they were estimating, all of us can have schedules that bite the dust. Okay, so with that said, sometimes that's out of your control, and I get it. Some of what we're going to talk about today, I've actually pulled from some of you, seeing how you did certain things on some of your schedules that I thought were really good. And so we're going to be sharing some of these, and we'll be sharing some other tips. First off, as you know, there's no silver bullet. No matter who we are, all of us could have a schedule that bites the dust. And so the way we get good at these things is that we have worked projects, and we have worked those projects that were a challenge. And so what happens is that we learn how to watch for different things the next time we run that project, so it doesn't hurt us so bad. So I'm going to give you a series of some ideas. Some of these ideas I think will fit you very well. Some of these ideas might not fit your particular type of project, but just be open to it. Your projects could change or evolve over some time. So let's take a look here as we do. Let's take a look at creating authentic and accurate project schedules. So let's start with one of the first things that is a little bit of a dynamic that some of you I know are having to deal with, and that is that the estimating you're doing for a project schedule might be something that's a little bit outside the realm of what you're used to. Maybe you haven't spent as much time in some of the other methodologies. Many of you who have done traditional project management, waterfall projects, you've done that probably maybe for years, and you feel very comfortable using that. You might be being faced with something such as how to do agile or a hybrid type project in your setting. Just in the last 3 years, as most of you know, many organizations have had to consider doing an agile or a hybrid type of project because the traditional just didn't fit for everything for them. And so that means that you find yourself as a project manager or as a manager, you're having to estimate something in Agile, and it might be something you've never done before, or estimate something with a hybrid where you're kind of working both types of methodologies at different parts. And that creates a whole different set of challenges for you. So one of the things that is happening that we're going to talk about a little bit today is we're going to give you a few tips on some of these that will help you in some of these different areas. So let's lay a little bit of the foundation on one side of plan driven. Plan driven is also known as waterfall. And so waterfall is the most common. It's traditional project management. It's been around for years and years. And so when many people talk about project management, including all of us, we a lot of times make that reference to waterfall. And the reason is because it has such a history with everybody and everything. Okay. So when you're looking at plan driven or waterfall, you're looking at features, you're looking at resources, and you're looking at time. And so we're trying to balance every one of those three sides. And so we spend our whole time looking at this. Now, the challenge I think that's happening with us right now is that across the board, many of you are working at organizations and you're working with skeleton crews potentially. So what do I mean by a skeleton crew? I mean that you have open positions that are not being hired. Nobody's being hired to fulfill. You're being asked to do more with less. All of that is pretty much the real world today. And then I think the other piece of that is happening is that the projects possibly are coming down the pipeline at the same potential pace. And so what you're looking at with resources, you've got the same pot of resources that's having to do everything for everybody. And that's the difference I think that we might be seeing in some of our scheduling than what we've seen before. But in plan driven, we're looking at these three sides. You're looking at time, features, and resources. And if I've got the same resources, then obviously that's going to extend time on some of these situations because I've got the same resources already committed to other things. And so it causes us to take a look at it. When you look over on the agile or the hybrid side, this would be looked at a little bit more as value driven. It means we're trying to deliver value to the customer, and we're going to be delivering it a lot of times in pieces because that delivers value to the customer earlier. And so many of you who are familiar with Agile and Scrum and hybrid type of methodologies, all of these are pieces of that. So value driven does the same thing, but notice what happens with time and resources and features. And so where we start looking at this, time and resources make a difference on how we're going to deliver those features. And that when you see this is one of the reasons why many times when you're running some type of Agile or some type of hybrid, hybrid, you start looking at it a little different from the aspect of the time and resources. I've got such a limited amount of resources. What type of features or what type of value do they want, and what is their highest priority? And so you find yourself with that priority mindset with Agile or with hybrid, because you're trying to deliver value to the customer faster. You're trying to deliver the value that they have selected. And that's one of the reasons why when you get into scheduling for Agile, or even in hybrid in some cases, is you find yourself trying to schedule in sprints or iterations to be able to hand something off to that customer and give them value earlier rather than later in some of those cases. And of course, it creates a whole different little spin for us as well. So let's determine the best schedule methodology. And so the best schedule methodology is the one that's going to work and not going to bite us in the buns, okay? We all have had those challenges. And so you're there looking at what's my best methodology for my environment, for my industry, for my company to builds trust with management, builds trust with the team. And so you're looking at it through those particular eyes. So you've got traditional on one side, and then of course you've got agile or change driven on the other side. So on the traditional side, this is what we're looking at, and all of you have experience in this. I know you're creating a complete plan up front. You're tracking the plan with strong controls, because that's what traditional is. It's a command and control type of method. And of course, the scheduling goes through change control. We schedule everything, we baseline it. Once we baseline from that point on, it goes through change control, command and control. Nothing happens without us knowing about it, and that's what we want. And there's not anything wrong with this. There are many projects that this absolutely should be the lifeblood of what we're doing and how we're doing it. On the flip side, though, you'll notice over here, you have the agile and change driven. And we've got so many new products coming out. We've got so many new initiatives coming out in our organizations. We're starting to find that even traditional organizations that have historically run traditional all the time are finding themselves in that hybrid agile type of mode. Now, you might not be calling it hybrid, but if you're walking away from traditional and you're putting all these other components in that really fit more the agile mode in certain places, that you probably are running a little bit of hybrid. Nothing wrong with that. That's just the real world right now. So in agile or change driven, this is built for the purpose of hitting a moving target. Many of you, your organizations are hitting on some of your projects at moving target. You don't even know what the target is. You have a general idea, and so you're shooting in that direction, trying to hit it and trying to anticipate where it's going to go. Also, creating a plan in Agile will help you in the area of small iterations. It allows you to give that delivery to the customer. It allows you to be able to hand off something to them, and for them to start using and giving feedback so that you can tell whether or not what you're doing is what they want. And the reason for some of this is because sometimes what we describe, we've never done before. It's brand new. It could be new technology, new product, new direction. And so we're trying to do something we've never done before. Then what you're looking at too is you're tracking the project progress through these iterations or through these sprints. You're handing something off every 3 or 4 weeks. Every 4 or 5 sprints, you've delivered a release to that customer, and the customer is getting more and more functionality or more value each and every iteration. You might be working with a product owner, if you happen to be doing Scrum, who's working with the customer, and they constantly are ranking those features. And so the customer is constantly getting the highest priority features they possibly can. And schedule changes are not looked at as an intrusion. Schedule changes are looked at as something that you want because you are hitting that moving target. And so you're looking at 2 different types of methodologies and philosophies with this, which do this. All right, so with that understanding as some foundation, let's talk about some tips in scheduling that will help us. Sometimes when we're scheduling, we're way too optimistic, especially right now with a skeleton crew. Just consider some of these things. I don't know your situation, and I don't know your people or anything like that, but I do know that historically or typically, if we've got new people, it's going to take them longer, as you know. If they're good people, but they just don't know. They just don't know, like some of your seasoned professionals or seasoned workers. So if I've got new people, a lot of new project team members, it's just going to take longer. You're going to answer more questions. You're going to explain more. They're trying to fit into the environment, so they don't know a lot, and so you find yourself having to answer and spend a lot more time with them. So when I'm scheduling, or when you're scheduling, you want to consider that, because that means it's going to take more time. So this item might typically take 40 hours of work. But if you got a brand new worker, somebody who doesn't know a whole lot, that 40 hours is not even going to come close. You're going to find yourself going beyond that. Even if you put somebody working working with them, it's going to take even the seasoned person longer to do it, because guess what they're doing? They're training that other person. So agile scheduling works best when created in one session normally. And so you find a team, an agile session of trying to plan out your sprint. The team, a lot of times with the product owner, are working together and negotiating what the time period is going to be. Depending on the agile method you use, many organizations will use somewhere between 1 to 4 weeks as a sprint, because once again, you're trying to get value to the customer faster, so you're trying to hand it off to them as quick as possible. You can follow templates that are customized to the organization or to the industry. You also, it aligns the schedule with the employee's real availability, and that's the piece that is the black area, the black hole for us, is what is the real availability of that worker, and that gets difficult when you've got that skeleton crew. Now, at this time, we're going to have activities periodically for you to go through throughout this course. And so your first activity is entitled Challenges in Following the Different Methodologies. And the goal of this activity is to really get you thinking to where you're thinking about the two main methodologies that are out there. You're thinking about traditional, but you're also thinking about agile. So I want you to take about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, ever how long you need, and be able to fill out some of the challenges on the traditional side and some of the challenges on the agile side. And this will allow you to really be able to do a deep dive into a variety of these topics as we do this, okay? So take a few moments and do this first activity. Now, there's some considerations when teams run multiple projects. And so I want to speak to this very, very clearly, only because you've got people who are working their buns off on all these different projects. But one of the challenges is if you're on multiple projects, then your scheduling has to change. Your whole mindset has to change. Now, many of you, I know I'm speaking to the choir here, because many of you have done this for a long time. You know exactly what I'm talking about. So when you look at trying to schedule your team, so let's say you've got a great team, great people, they're good workers. Their experience. Let's go from that angle first. So you've got that great team, but let's look at how they're working on projects. So if they're working on one project, the scheduling of that one project is going to be a little different. Why? I know that the potential of crisis in something else is not going to pull that worker away generally. So I'm going to be able to count on that person working whatever I put down on that one project. But that's not the scenario most of your people are in, and that's not the scenario most of you are in. Most of you, because of that skeleton crew, you have just limited staff. You probably have noticed that you've got multiple projects, and everybody's got multiple projects, and it might even be more projects than you've ever run before. So let's say when you were fully staffed, you had maybe 3 projects, but now you find yourself running 6 or 7 or whatever the number is. That changes the dynamics of scheduling too, because think about it. You that are project managers, if there's going to be a crisis someplace on some project, it's going to pull that worker off if they have any experience at all. And so I've got to plan into my schedule for any project I've got them working on, the anticipation I'm going to lose them periodically for a crisis, maybe not on our project, but they're going to be working on a crisis with somebody else's project. And that's one piece that we're biting ourselves. We're trying to create a schedule a lot of times, and we're optimistic on every schedule. And so in other words, project 1, we're optimistic. We can do this and we can do this in 50 months. Well, you probably could if that was the only project. This project, we could do this in 24 months. You probably could. But can I do those 2 projects in 24 and 50 months if I'm using the same resources for the most part and anticipating crisis? Probably not. And so you're not trying to be the doomsday prophet, okay? The sky's not always falling, even though it's going to fall some. The sky's not always falling. But you are trying to be realistic that I've got the same group of resources in these 2 areas. So this is an interesting piece here that I put up here. So this was pulled in just in February, and I was skimming this and I thought this was interesting. Project team members cannot work 100% of the time or 40 hours per week. Most of you probably don't do this with your teams. Every now and then I'll run across it now, but years ago you used to see people who said, okay, Keith, you're going to be on my project team 40 hours a week. I'm counting 40 hours a week on that project. It doesn't work like that. And especially if you're working multiple projects, because I can't count 40 hours because there's going to be something that's going to pull us away in every one of those pieces. Even if you take the 40 hours and divide it among those projects, you can't count 40 hours. Nobody is that productive in the workplace. The maximum percentage to schedule most team members is 80%, and even lower if they're working on more than 3 projects. And I thought, man, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Because if you schedule somebody at 80%, that would be looked at generally as maxed out. Many of you actually do it less than 80% just to protect your people. And you should, because many of you are doing 60 or 70% depending on that. And they use the term, they use the count of 3 projects. Some of you are working on more than that. I have you in class, so I hear all the different projects you're working on. And that doesn't count the projects you're attending meetings that haven't even gotten into the pipeline yet. That's the one that always cracks us up, is that you're attending the meetings on 3 projects. It's not going to start until the end of the year, but you've got to go to these meetings. So it's like you've got these loose projects even on the side. Then notice the other percentage. 59% of the project managers run between 2 and 5 projects. 11% run 6 to 10 projects, and 15% run more than 10 at a time. And only 15% of the project managers work on only 1 project at a time. And so that's my assumption is, and maybe you're in a different situation. I get it. If you are, that's good. If you're working on 1 project at a time, God bless you, because the vast majority of people are not doing that. And so that's not what's happening here. But I thought that was kind of an interesting. So here's another tip for you to consider. Understand the skill sets and the core competencies of your team members. What can they do? What can they not do? What are they developing on? And also set some reasonable assignments, taking into effect the number of other project team members and that are working on at once. And so what you're looking at is how many projects. And so you're trying to balance this thing and make it realistic. Everybody feels the pressure to schedule the shortest amount of time. And I know you're trying to do this. You're feeling pressure from management or from the customer, and you're trying desperately to do that and to do it in realistic estimates, okay? Most people, we talk about the people just throwing numbers over the wall, and not that we all haven't been in those situations, of course we have, but most of us try not to do that. But you do have to take into consideration what's the competency, what's the skill set. Great worker, a little bit slower than somebody else. And we have those people. And you know what? They're good team members. They're good people, but they're not going to do it as fast as someone else. And that's okay. They do a good job. They're solid. They communicate. Nobody's arguing with them. All the things that drive us nuts, everybody likes them. But the point is they're just not quite as fast, but that's still a bona fide good team member. So how are we measuring how fast or how long something's going to take? Now, in scheduling, the purpose of scheduling is to provide a roadmap of how to get through the project. On the Agile side, and Scrum in particular, it'll talk about the roadmap. That's really what you're looking for. It represents how and when the project will deliver the products defined in the project scope and by the project team. So your team is always going to be your most important piece if you're using the same resources as many of you are. And part of that's going to be based on time of year. For an example, many of you have heard me say this, but here in Missouri, and many of you are here in Missouri, we have hunters. And so we have hunters that, when it comes deer season, you are not going to see them working on a project much. They are in the woods. That's what they save all their vacation up for that. Now, if you're not a hunter, then it's not a big deal to you. And you might think, well, all year we have every day that's on the calendar. But you know as well as I do, those of you who have hunters, or if you are a hunter, that's a big deal. Wanda's family are all hunters. And so at Christmas time that it all revolves around hunting. And you hear step by step, there I was, and the deer did this, and so they go through every piece of it. I'm not a hunter, but I love hearing the stories. But my point in saying this is not disparaging on hunters at all. My point in saying that is you anticipate the group of people you have. And so these folks are going to be a little bit slower and take more time off at that time of the year. Christmas, we know November 15th to January 5th. That's always a lower time. If you've got a lot of family, a lot of people working for you who have families in sports, you probably have noticed that, man, from spring until summer gets over with and school starts back, you've got a lot of parents who are doing sporting events. They're taking kids on softball trips, and they're driving them, so they're getting off a little bit early or coming in a little late. And so you're trying to accommodate a lot of those different pieces for those different things. So my point in saying that is your people and the type of people that you have working for you, good people, but they're going to have some other things pulling on them with some of this. All right, so let's talk about creating schedules from the traditional standpoint, and then we'll pull it on over into the other sides. So when we talk about traditional projects, the world that many people think about is a single path of scheduling is the simplest way to schedule a project and monitor performance. So when we talk about a single path of scheduling, we're talking about this. And this is great. This is just not the reality. We don't normally run a one project at a time. We don't have that blessing. We have multiple projects, and of course, many of them have been given to us late. Somebody set the deadline early and it sat on somebody's desk forever. I'm sure that doesn't happen with anybody here, but all those things are some of those challenges that you get into a little bit. The second type of path that you get into then is the multiple path scheduling. This is what is the real world that most of you are dealing with, I think. And so a multiple path of scheduling complicates the schedule because it requires more oversight, more rework than anything else. And the reason is because you've got so much stuff running. So if you've got multiple paths of scheduling running on with just one project, think of how complicated it is for those of you who are running 3 to 5. You've got so many things running that, man, if anything goes wrong, you've got that domino effect happening there. And so this is really kind of the visual of what we get into. And that's even on one project because we were trying to fast track that project, and rightly so. I get it. I get why we're doing that in so many cases. But the point is that sometimes people think, well, fast tracking, we're going to fast track everything. Limited resources and fast tracking everything is a prescription for disaster on some project at some point. Somebody's going to miss something that's going to give you a hiccup. Or here's the other side that maybe you haven't thought of: burnout. You're going to burn your people out. And those people are going to end up going someplace else and working for somebody else, and they'll be a great employee someplace else. So we've got to be able to balance those pieces out for just a moment. Now, let me take a look here. I see a couple of things. All right, so let me ask. So on the chat, somebody are y'all having trouble hearing me? Are you having trouble understanding me? Give me a thumbs up if everything's okay. Give me a thumbs up if everything's okay. Thumbs up, thumbs up. I see them all over. Okay. All right. Thumbs up. Okay. Thank you. So some of the folks are having a little bit of problems with some of it. So I just wanted to see if it was everyone. All right. So let's go ahead and go back. So can the team do this level of work on the project is what you're having to ask yourself. And are we doing it on the most important project? Because this is where you get into the prioritization. Prioritization for all of us is kind of a challenge with our projects. We want management to prioritize what's going to be the most important projects because they're being driven by the strategic plan. But you also are wanting us to work on the most important. The challenge some of you are having, I think, that we hear about in class is that this is the priority for for this month, and then before you know it, this is the priority now, and so this is still a priority, but this is a priority over that. And then, oh, guess what? Here comes number 3, and you've got that third one that's now the priority over all the others, and you got those swapping priorities, and that's just one of the challenges I think that is part of our time right now. How many other projects are the team members working on? If we're not looking at can the team member do this level of work? In other words, are they mature enough? Are they deep enough in their training, their skills to do this? And how many other projects are they working on? Those two things have to be a consideration in every estimate you come up with, because once again, that estimate is going to have to be massaged because of this. Now, let me just give you a simple example. Give me a thumbs up if you use the great research tool YouTube to fix stuff around your house. Give me a thumbs up if you use YouTube to fix stuff around your house. Okay. All right. So here's the thing. I do too. And so you probably do something similar to me. We watch several YouTubes and you look to see, do I think I can fix it? I mean, that's the question I'm coming up with. And so I don't talk to Wanda about it because I know what her answer is. Call the man, that's going to be her thing. But if I think I can fix it, I'll watch several YouTubes until I get somebody I can trust. And then what happens with that is you find out, you kind of watch what they're doing. And then a lot of times they'll give you the time. Oh, this took me 15 minutes to do this right here. If you'll do it like this, it's only going to take you 10 minutes. Now, here's the thing that I've discovered with me. I don't care what time they say on YouTube, because none of those times work for me. This guy did something in 20 minutes. I had 3 hours invested. Okay. And you know why? Because I've never taken my refrigerator apart before. And so when I took my doors off my refrigerator, the whole thing in my head was, I am praying I can put this thing back together. I will hear it from Wanda. And so it took me 3 hours. He did it in 20 minutes. It took me 3 hours. Why? Because I'm a novice on working on stuff. That's not me. Guess what? You've got people who are a novice as well. And so they're struggling with some of those pieces. Now, what does this mean? It takes us into that work in progress, WIP. Those of you who run Scrum or Agile, you're very familiar with this, and sometimes we don't have a choice on this. It is what it is. These projects we're working on, we've got multiple projects. It is, we can't change it. We're not going to slow anything down. There's no way to do that. I get it. But if we can put them in some kind of pecking order, that's going to be one of those pieces. And so you'll notice here in your slide, we've got multiple projects coming into the pipeline. And that was what I was referring to of attending some of these meetings of projects that's maybe 6 or 8 months down the road, and yet you find your time wrapped up in a project that's not even technically a project yet. So work in progress means that we're prioritizing the work and we're slowing it down so that we can work on the most important projects at all time. I know you can't do that all the time. I know you can't, but when you can do that, that helps your team. If you've got a limited scale of people, limited amount of resources, you can't just keep running the same amount of projects down without expanding the resource pool. You're going to have to. That'd be like us. How many air traffic controllers do we have today in St. Louis? Well, we've got one. I got an idea. Let's just keep sending all those planes to St. Louis like we normally do when they're fully staffed with 14 people. Let's send every plane. Well, no, you don't want all those planes coming in there. That's going to overwhelm that one resource. Okay. Same thing in project management when you're looking at this. In this activity, create the process the organization uses to estimate projects. So this isn't a criticism of your organization, but take a few moments and kind of think through what steps does it take to create an estimate in your current organization. And then the second part of this is the responsibilities of the estimator. In your organization, is the estimator expected to be right on target, or do they have some flexibility and some versatility in their estimate? And so I want you to be able to document some of this about the estimator. So first off, the process, and then secondly, I want you to think about the responsibilities of the estimator. So in the predictive or the traditional model, you've got several points that helps you make those estimates. And so what you're wanting to do, and experience helps you based on what you've done in the past, but you've got several things such as milestones, work packages, which come out of the WBS, and which if you've looked at any of the standards from PMBOK, or PMI, you know that one of the things you do is you start with the scope, you break it down into a WBS, and you break the WBS down all the way down to work packages. And you break those work packages down to what would be considered the 880 rule. No smaller than 8 hours, no larger than 80, and come up with an estimate and a cost for that work package. So that is traditional. Now, most of us, that might not be how your organization does it. Somebody maybe gives you a budget and gives you a duration. I get it, okay? But that's where the work packages fit in. And then what you're looking at, a lot of times you might be measuring phases. Some of you do a lot of your calculations based on the phases or activities. Activities would be below a work package. I've got a work package level, and then I break it down into activities here. And so that's right. And of course, a lot of you are using critical path method to where you're tracking your critical path all the way through. And so that's going to be very important for you, because that critical path is going to be the longest path through your project, and it's going to be something that's going to be very beneficial for you. So traditional projects in the critical path, it's the longest path, and deviations from the critical path can hurt us. And the reason is because it causes us to maybe do something or work on something that's not as high a priority as what the critical path is. So critical path, this is called the critical path technique, and most of us who've done traditional follow something similar to this as we do this. Now, this brings us into that question mark that we all have, and that is the uncertainty of scheduling. There's going to be something we don't know about the schedule. So are stakeholders confident in the scope of work that is stable and not going to change a bunch? Or is it just kind of a generalized scope that's kind of out there to get us going, but you anticipate there's going to be a lot of changes? Does the current scope include the breadth of the work or only a portion of the work? And is some of that still evolving? Also, is the current priority of the project likely to change from being to a higher priority project? So are my resources, here's the thing, is another project going to cannibalize my resources and bring them over to that project? And if you've had that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Your schedule's shot at that point because you don't have anybody working on your project. They're working on something else that's of a higher priority. So that's one of the pieces you're having to look at. So from the traditional side, if you've had any experience or anything in any of these areas, this is what you've been doing. You've done program evaluation review technique, PERT, critical path method we just referred to, arrow diagramming method. This is what your network diagram is made out of. Precedence diagramming connects with all of that as well. And you've got estimates based on how long this activity is gonna take, when it's gonna finish, when this one's gonna begin, and you start moving through all of those in that method. Traditional, all the way. That's how many people are doing it. And nothing wrong with that. Those things can be very beneficial. Now, when we start looking at the constraints of scheduling, and we all have some type of constraint, we've got these two constraints here. And so we've got time constraints. And so on the time constraint, this feeds into a couple of different things because this might have a mandated deadline, prioritized checkups for forecasting, or fixed time, but flexible resources. All of these kind of things are challenges I know you deal with. And so, you know, you can't count on the person being here because somebody else with a higher priority project pulls them off. On the other side is your resource constraint. And so that resource constraint level resource level cannot be exceeded. I can only use these 5 people. And so prioritize resources for peak demands. And then you might have fixed resources, but flexible times. And so you're not able to count on them always being there because of whatever reason. And this doesn't take into account that somebody might be a subject matter expert and they're a subject matter expert over 15 projects. And so you can't count on getting them in because they are so overworked. And so it's such a challenge to be able to do this. But all of these are parts of this. Now, as you look at this scheduling constraints, over on the left-hand side, one of the things that people will use is schedule smoothing, monitor the pace of the project, communicate to both the team and the sponsor continuously so that you're not getting caught behind the curve on this thing. You're communicating that we're struggling. Our resources have been pulled off. The other projects pulled 5 of my people off, and so we're struggling with this. All of that has to be communicated because if not, people are going to hold you to the exact same deadlines that you've always had. So you find yourself doing a lot of that. Over on the other side with resources, splitting activities into smaller sections to where people can maybe do a small section of it, even though they might not have the experience to do it all. Selecting which team members work together, balancing out work to team members, those who balancing out some work to where some people would be able to do something that's maybe a little bit harder or a little bit more sophisticated because of their expertise. That would help benefit them in some of these cases. And so you might find yourself having to shift around. And so what I'm saying is roles and responsibilities might be secondary to getting the project finished. And so the role I have normally might not be the role I'm doing on this project because we need all the manpower and all the men and women working on this project and working on this thing, doing whatever we need to do to get it out the door. So that forces us then, or presses us then, to speed up the project when time is restrained. So when a project experiences a hard deadline, the team and management must become creative. And you've all done this. And so for an example, crashing the project. And so the budget could and often goes up when we try to crash the project. As you know, crashing is defined as throwing more resources at something. And we do that. We throw more resources at it to try to do that. And so what happens? There's no free resources, so it costs us more. Outsourcing. Well, we hire a vendor, but there's a learning curve with your vendor. And then also overtime. So we're trying to get people to work later. And of course, overtime is not even available in some of these cases for some of these folks.
As we continue to think about estimating, I want you to think about overestimating the project resources. So this is going from the aspect of that you probably have a limited amount of people internally, and you probably have a lot more projects than you do people. And so I've got some questions here for you to consider as you think through overcommitting project resources. Does your organization consistently do that? Do you consistently do that where you overcommit project resources? Now, the focus of this is that area to where you're thinking about one project compared to working on multiple projects. If your people are working on multiple projects, you have to take that in consideration because you've got a small pool of resources and you've got a lot more projects that you're having to work on.
Time is restrained. So when a project experiences a hard deadline, the team and management must become creative. And you've all done this. And so for an example, crashing the project. And so the budget could and often goes up when we try to crash the project. As you know, crashing is defined as throwing more resources at something. And we do that. We throw more resources at it to try to do that. And so what happens? There's no free resources, so it costs us more. Outsourcing. Well, we hire a vendor, but there's a learning curve with your vendor. And then also overtime. So we're trying to get people to work later. And of course, overtime is not even available in some of these cases for some of these folks. The other piece might be speeding up the project when resources are constrained would be when a project experiences a limit in resources, other areas might have to be adjusted too. For an example, fast tracking. Fast tracking we know is running as many activities simultaneously as possible. What's the negative? Well, you got quality and rework issues because I've got so much stuff running simultaneously, not only on our project, but a lot of different ones. Lower quality could be the potential here. We're running so fast, we're not taking time to really check for quality. So potential missing requirements and missing quality initiatives might not be there. Reducing the scope. You'll see some folks want to trim the scope back and give less scope out because of trying to get something out the door faster. And sometimes that's very appropriate, and sometimes that doesn't help the customer. And then, of course, critical chain. Critical chain looks at it through the eyes of we put our float in one big pot at the end of each sequence of activities, and we use it if we need to. If we don't, we drop it and keep moving. Critical chain was in the airline industry for years, and critical chain is a technique that some people are using rather than schedule all the activities with some type of contingency that could embellish the score or the duration of that actual activity. They put it in one big pot that they can drop it off and hold that schedule a little bit tighter. And so I can see some advantages of some of that as well. Now, speeding up the project when the resources are unrestrained, understand the specific scope to be delivered by the hard deadline, determine which type of framework or methodology to use for the project. Are we using Agile? Are we using Scrum? Are we using Waterfall? Because that will dictate. And then negotiate to streamline the processes and the sign-off dates if using Waterfall. And so once again, you know, we've got a process, we've got a methodology, and especially in Waterfall, you'll find some people that, boy, it is just hard-nosed every piece of the way. But the thing is, when there's crisis happening with our projects, you find that people do negotiate and rework a lot of this. And so you might find yourself having to do pieces of this. Now, working with a time-constrained ending date. So creating a list of the best resources to seek to have them move to your team. So we've got a real tight date. This is a high priority project. Might even be a regulatory date. And if we miss it, we're going to be fined or something like this. Okay, so what would you do? Well, you'd pull, and in your mind, you start thinking of the key people that are going to work the best on that team. And I'd start negotiating for those people. Discuss the potential of adding other resources over time, which can create a little bit of a time buffer on the schedule, and consistently give feedback to the sponsor or PMO on the progress and on each section of work. Once again, communication, communication to management or to the sponsor or to the PMO is going to be key in making sure you keep the resources that you want on this project on what's happening here. So in project planning and scheduling the process, we'll kind of walk through this. So I started here with creating a WBS because that actually is the Project Management Institute mindset. You got the scope of work, you create a WBS, you define the activities, create a network diagram. And so you start looking at estimating the activity durations and also estimating resources required to be able to fulfill that. And of course, that all feeds into your schedule. And of course, that gives you a deadline at that time. And then eventually you're going to baseline this schedule if you're running traditional and measure against that schedule. So reasons for not planning and scheduling. So over the years, you've seen this as well as I have. Many people just kind of do it on a wing and a prayer. Some will actually get a plan signed off on and then actually not follow the plan. So laziness is one piece of it. Some will avoid accountability. So they don't really want to plan because they don't want to be accountable. Inability, they don't know how to plan something out. As compared to some of your people who are just awesome at just really being able to work the system. And then you've got people who it's ignorance. They've never been trained. They've never been worked at with something like that. And so it's one of those pieces that they are having to expand and learn. And in the beginning, think about it. This would overwhelm all of us.
We're focusing on constraints and how they can limit project speed. Obviously, constraints can be time, it can be money, it can also be the scope of work itself. And so what I want you to do is look at and compare constraints to what that's doing to your estimates right now. It might make a difference on how you can view the estimating process. And so you're going to look at some examples of project time constraints, and then also you're going to look at some of some examples of project resource constraints. So thinking about constraints has to be considered when you're doing estimating of any type of project. So take a few moments and walk and work through this activity.
Challenge with this is that the assumption is when I'm doing a WBS, I understand the whole scope up front. And many of you are working on those projects that the whole scope is not known up front. And so it kind of evolves, or it kind of trickles in at times. And so that's going to make a WBS much more difficult, because I've missed something just because we don't know what we don't know. And so that's going to be a challenge. So once the WBS is finished in traditional, it has to be maintained and updated. And of course, the work is added, deleted, clarified, depending on what we're doing as we go through the traditional side there. The lowest level of the WBS, is the work package level, and that's considered to be the level that we are able to get our best estimates. And then we break that down into activities, which are later going to fulfill our schedule and go into the scheduling tool. So schedule. So some people will create schedules with different terms. And so I just wanted to throw a couple of ideas out. Some will create it with a noun, which is a thing, a time plan for a procedure or a project. Schedule. Some will do it with a verb, an action to appoint or plan a certain time or date. Either of those can be very appropriate. You're just trying to have consistency as you're putting your schedule together and trying to make sure that people understand it is what you're trying to do. So let's go a little further here with activities. Now, the activity that we're talking about, you might call it a task, and that's fine. So an activity is going to be smaller than a work package. So we break the work package down to the work package level. Now we take the work package, break it down into the activities. So you can identify and document the specific activities that must be performed to produce the deliverable that you've been working with the WBS. And those activities are normally what you're putting into your Gantt chart. So if you're looking at a Gantt chart, you're probably looking at the activity level in most cases. So that you detail the activities and make them small enough to where you can come up with accurate budgeting, accurate scheduling, and you think, okay, I feel like I understand what we're doing here. And then when you're finished, that activity definition will start, and you'll have start and finish dates. That's when you're actually loading it into your schedule. You're going to have start and finish dates for that activity. And so if that activity is going to last 10 work days, then you're going to have a start time and an end time of those 10 work days. And that's the piece where we start falling apart in scheduling. We think it's 10 work days. Did we consider the other projects? Did we consider what time of year it is? Did we consider what's going on with this person in their life too? Because it might be 10 days of work effort, but it might actually take 15 to 20 days to be able to get that work done, get that work out of them because of all the other projects that are on their plate. So what are used to create those activity definitions? You're looking at that scope statement. You're going back to the scope statement, which has developed that WBS. And the WBS and those work packages have been broken down into those categories of work to help us with these activities. And those activities will be much, much clearer.
All right, now you're getting ready to do an activity called creating estimates using the WBS. Remember, the WBS is your work breakdown structure. This is how PMI encourages people to, on a traditional project, to create their estimate. You would break it down into the various levels of work packages and then come up with a duration of time and a duration of cost for each of these. So I want you to take a few moments and do this as practice. If you've never done it before, it's kind of eye-opening as you start breaking it down. The lowest level should be the work package level, and it should be no larger than 880, no smaller than 8 hours, no larger than 80 hours. Now, your work package level is not an activity, so don't mistake it for that. An activity is what you do when you break the work package down further. You break it down into activities. So break it down to the work package level, 880, and then later on, if in the real world, you can break that work package down into activities. So take a few moments and work on this activity.
Now, let's change gear. And if you're not doing any scheduling for Agile, let's go ahead and hit a little bit of this, because you might be doing something at some point in Agile or in hybrid, okay? So if you're not familiar with this, in Agile, or in Scrum, it's not uncommon for the people doing the estimating, which many times is the team, to do it in what is called story points or hours. And so as you start looking at these, story points is nothing more than a fictitious estimating technique, is really all it is. There is some kind of ratio of story point to hours is really what's there. And so Agile or Scrum, they're used for an estimating technique in Agile and Scrum for creating duration. And so you might have one story point for 8 hours of work. The team sets it. It's not a standard any place in any book. And so every team would set what their story point is. So project hours focuses on the amount of work hours one needs to complete a section of a project. And so that's the reason why if you're working with a vendor or somebody and they tell you it's 14 story points, you want to know what is their ratio or how are they defining that? Because if it's a story point per 8 hours or story point per 4 hours, that's going to be good information for you to know. Now, the benefit of why people use story points to hours is estimating and story points is very fast for them to be able to come up with this. Story points are focused on effort or the amount of time to create a feature. It doesn't count the total time for delivery. So even though they're counting 8 hours, that's not total time. It might take 16 hours to produce the 8 hours of work. And so if we're counting it in hours, real time is easy to understand. You can forecast the potential delivery. Hours can count the total amount of time to produce the entire feature, and total hours can help with historical knowledge. Yes, it's only 8 hours to do this, but it took us 15 hours to get the people free to be able to do all of these pieces. Now, Agile and project control, schedule, and budget are all a little bit kind of connected here. Agile, the goal of Agile is the flexibility. Goal of Scrum is flexibility, okay? So traditional is where you've got the command and control, but we do still try to control Agile to some extent. Agile projects normally have more flexibility, and normally Agile is connected to that product owner who's in charge of the features, user stories, user stories, and to be able to keep them ranked according to what the customer wants. So that Agile, that product owner is working with the customer and working with the team, but doesn't have authority over the team. The team is still doing the estimates and determining how much work can be done in each of the sprints or each of the iterations. There's no critical path in Agile. In pure Agile or Scrum, there's no critical path for that kind of control. The only main control that you'll see in an Agile side is that if it's a 4-week time box for a sprint, you don't go past it. You deliver what you've done, and then you talk about those extra activities or those extra features that were not finished with the product owner and maybe the customer to see what do they want done. And so that's really the biggest control that you have is those time boxes. Also, Agile uses releases for schedules as well. And so in other words, a release and a iteration is not the same thing. At the end of each iteration, you're going to hand that customer something to begin working with and seeing from the project. So you're giving them, let's say there's 300 features we're delivering, and we're delivering 15 features at the end of each iteration. The customer starts working with those, starts telling us what they like or don't like, and then we start making changes and adjustments for that. But that's not a release. That's just one of the sprint handoffs that we give. So in your plan, you might have that for every 5 handoffs, that's one release. And then the next 5 handoffs, that's release number 2. And so you can run your schedule very committed to these releases. So I want you to see these releases that I've got here at the bottom of the screen, and these are iterations underneath it. So release number 1, I had 2. Release number 2, I actually had 3 iterations to produce it. And then release number 3, I actually had 4. And so a release and an iteration are not the same thing. And sometimes you'll hear people talk about that because they're giving something to the customer. And I get it. They think that that might be a release, and actually it might not be. So Agile scheduling process. So you meet with the product owner, you discuss the scope of the sprints. Now, you're not discussing every sprint that you're going to do. You're discussing the main sprint that you're getting ready to start just within a few days that's going to last, let's say, 4 weeks long. You estimate with the team the selected story points, features, user stories, ever how you're counting it, what's going to go in there, and then the team is going to give a lot of input on this. They're not inheriting that estimate most of the time. And so then you plan the sprint, and then you plan the time to do a review. At the end of each sprint, they have what's called a sprint review or a iteration review. That is like a demo. And so you demo what you've done to the customer. and then that gets handed to the customer for them to start working with. You also have to plan in a retrospective. It's like a lessons learned. It's at the end of each sprint. So you're wanting your people learning from each sprint, just like we do in a project. If you're running it by phase in traditional, you do a lessons learned at the end of each phase. And of course, you do a lessons learned at the end of the project. So it's very similar in those ways. And the schedule, the retrospective, so that you've got knowledge transfer. And after 3 sprints, you check the velocity. Now, the velocity, if you're not familiar with that term, is an average. How many features or how many story points did we do in three sprints? The reason for this is that a lot of times when you're talking to someone about Agile or Sprint, they say, well, we can't give you a deadline. We're doing Agile. Well, that's silly. No manager is going to put up with that. No, and they shouldn't. After 3 iterations, you start getting a velocity, an average. So in other words, if I'm producing 15 features per iteration and I've got 45 features done at the end of 3, then this gives you something to start forecasting. You say, well, that's, you're kind of guessing. Well, no, you're not. You're basing it on real work. And of course, you can look and see if your velocity is increasing or is it decreasing based on the work, but it at least gives you something to be shooting for as you start projecting out. We're averaging 15 per iteration, and we've got 500 features that we've got to produce. And so how long is it going to take? Okay, it's going to take us at least until this point on the calendar. It allows you at least to forecast it. Might not be perfect, but no schedule is 100% perfect that we use even now.
In this activity, we're going to talk about the benefits of using Agile or hybrid in estimating projects. Now, for many of you, you might spend your time estimating traditional all the time, but maybe some of you are just now starting to look at other ways to be able to do something kind of a hybrid, a traditional with a little bit of Agile in it. That's what we're going into, and you're seeing this across the world right now where people are starting to do some type of hybrid project. But I want you to think about it from that aspect, from an estimating standpoint. So what are the benefits of using Agile or hybrid in estimating some of the projects that you're working on right now at your organization? Your second question asks you, though, what could harm the estimating accuracy when using Agile or hybrid? And so it allows you an opportunity to kind of think about it from the opposite side of, could we make things worse by using Agile or hybrid? And so think that through and kind of do a deep dive into this topic a little bit.
Popular on the Scrum and Agile side, and it also is getting a resurgent on the traditional side to double check estimates that have been given to them. And so what's happening is people are starting to do pessimistic, optimistic, and most likely to see whether or not that estimate, how close that estimate is to what they've been given. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a good, fast estimate for you and your team to come up with. If it's a horrible project, a very deadly project, many people are giving a 4 times the most likely. But one of one of our clients actually told us they do 4 times the pessimistic. If it's such a horrible project with so many risks associated, they'll do 4 times the pessimistic. So they'll do optimistic, pessimistic 4 times, and then most likely, and they'll do the average divided by 6 to see whether or not that estimate is close to what's been given to them. So none of that's perfect. I get it. You might not like that, and that's okay. But it does give you a way to be able to go back and take a look and see how close these are. So where do you get them? Anticipate estimates to continue to be more accurate over time. We know the least at the beginning of any project, Agile or traditional. And so you know that after we've done it for a while, if you've 18 months into a project, working with your team, working with your people, you're starting to get a good feel for this project. You know how long it's going to take for stuff. That's information you didn't have the first time you were doing this. So you can encourage the sharing of tacit knowledge from experienced people, coaching, mentoring, all of that. It needs to be part of it. And on the Agile side, it's really connected. And your millennials are very open to all of this as well, being able to do that coaching. And then decomposition. Decomposition is a term over on the Agile side. It's very similar to what we're talking about with work breakdown structure. Each item on the activity list would eventually have a budget and a duration estimate, but you're breaking down that activity, or you're breaking down those features so that we understand the steps that we're going to have to do for each feature. And so it can give people a visual of what that feature is going to entail for that particular sprint. So decomposition is becoming very popular on the Agile side. And so one of the techniques for this is you begin the process with major deliverables of the project, and then you break them into smaller deliverables until you reach the point where the resources assigned to these tasks can make accurate estimates of the duration and cost of the task. Sounds very similar to WBS, doesn't it? Well, that's the principle there, but you're doing it at a much smaller level because you're doing it at a sprint level, and you're doing it for a 4-week sprint with time box of 4 weeks. So you're trying to get that work out the door in a very quick and fast manner. Rolling wave planning is something that can be utilized in both. And so this approach is used in large or long-term projects where there's some uncertainty. And so you estimate what you can, and then as you learn more, your estimates get better over time, and you adjust your estimates over time. You decompose other tasks later when early work on the project makes the deliverable clear. And we use this kind of inadvertently. We do this because we learn. You learn that, well, I've got 5 hours for this, man. It's taken us 8 every time we've done this. So we start adjusting, realizing that we're not going to hit it at 5 hours. That's just not where we are. So all of this on the agile side, and even on some of the hybrid side, is going to include that change-driven kind of mindset. We are expecting changes. We're planning for those. So sprints, releases, time boxing, frequent deliveries, roadmap, all of those are some of the components on that agile side that allows us to be able to have some freedom and flexibility. None of it is really locked in, except that you're trying not to make any changes once the sprint begins to allow the team to be productive and execute. That's what you're trying desperately to do. Now, let me hit the last handful of slides here very quickly. We don't have but a few more here, and then we'll pull this together for you. So creating schedules in hybrid. Hybrid is going to use a variety of both of these. And so hybrid project schedules allows the project manager, the team, the stakeholders to use whatever scheduling method is going to benefit them. Because what they're trying to do is which one's going to work for this project. You can use command and control for some of it. You could use agile and some of those estimates, some of the agile estimating techniques for the other part of it. You could use any of those that you choose to use. In hybrid, it is more flexible, and it allows you to customize any kind of tracking of the performance that you allow and that you want. And hybrid project schedules require support, versatility for management by giving authority and the ability to make decisions to the team so the project can maintain high performance. One of the reasons why you're doing agile, one of the reasons why you're doing hybrid is you want high performance. So you can't have everything revolving around command and control unless management's willing to be in those meetings so that that command and control is close to the action. And so you've got to have somebody being able to make those decisions fast. So traditional really kind of works against this in some cases. The other side of this is considering the resources. Are the resources working on one project or multiple? What is the priority of the project? Do team members have experience in this type of project, or is it new? Many people are trying agile for the first time and hybrid for the first time. Is there some training that the teams need to bridge the knowledge gap? And so that might be training from you being able to pass that over for some of your experienced people. Does the team have confidence in the estimates? And I will tell you, generally, people don't have confidence in the estimates that they've inherited. They have more confidence in the estimates that they create. So if you're inheriting these, check them out. You want to check, do a PERT on it at least, and see how does this measure up with what you think it's going to take. Alignment with schedules. So does the project align with the strategic objectives the way you understand it? Does management support the project at a real high level? Or is this just another one of those work efforts that will eventually be trumped by another work effort, which could be there? On the agile side for scheduling, how much authority does the agile team possess? Does the team function as a full agile team, or are they forced to allow some internal processes and have to dictate, more like a hybrid situation? It's okay. It is what it is sometimes. You're doing as much agile as you can, and you've got as much flexibility as you can, and that's all you can have. So that's good. That's okay. But the point is that all of that could slow the project down if the goal is to get the project out as fast as possible. You're looking at the planning and scheduling. So planning is the process of determining in advance the work to be done on a project. Scheduling is assigning specific times and dates to the work. And that's what we're talking about by a schedule. In traditional, that makes the most sense to you because you've seen those Gantt charts with the beginning of an activity, the ending of that activity. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to look at what is a realistic schedule, start and finish, to be able to do this work, whether I'm doing traditional or agile.
With this activity, you're coming down to the end of the 3-hour intensive. And so we're going to be talking about best practices for speeding up a project. In your organization, you probably have learned some techniques to be able to speed up projects or portions of the project when you get behind. That's what we want to focus on here, to have you think through, is there a way to speed it up? Are we just going to follow the schedule regardless of what happens? And if we get behind, we just get behind. Most projects are not allowed to just continue to get further and further behind. Many times you have to come up with some kind of strategy to speed them up. And that's what we want you thinking about today as you're thinking about estimating it here. So we have 4 different points here: increasing the speed of current traditional projects. What's your best practice that you know of that you've seen? Crashing a project, changing project priorities. What are some of the best practices? And then also the last one, dealing with waiting time for decisions or approvals from management. What are some best practices that you have seen to be able to get management to make the decision or to speed them up on some of the decisions? So spend a few moments on this activity and looking at best practices. Congratulations, you're at the end of your course. In this activity, you're going to focus on creating an action plan that you're going to follow since you're done with this course. Now, I've broken this action plan down a little bit differently. So it's not just a few ideas that you thought were good. I broke it down into 4 specific areas to help you create a true action plan to where you're doing something with this 3-hour intensive. So the first is, I will research. What areas do you want to research more that you picked up on from this 3-hour intensive? Secondly, I will read or study certain areas. Is there certain components or certain topics that you want to read a little bit more and be able to understand a little bit better? Third, I will take action and begin doing certain things. What is it that you want to start doing that you've picked up from this 3-hour intensive? And then the last one, I will talk with my superiors about these things. What items or topics do you want to talk to management or your supervisor or even peers on the team about from the aspect of estimating? The action plan helps you be able to create some type of action steps to where you're going to be different tomorrow than you are today. And that's what we're really wanting to do in all of our projects, is to be able to be totally different from down the road and continue to get better and better and have that continuous learning and continuous improvement kind of mindset. Let me thank you so much for taking this course. And so I look forward to seeing you in another course or in another 3-hour intensive. So have a great day. Bye now.